Serious, teachers of Reddit, when have you met the parents of a student and suddenly understood their behavior? CCE teacher here. If you know anything about young kids, it's that their personality and behavior is heavily influenced by the kids around them, no matter how good, bad, serious, or rowdy they are. Sit 6 on them on a table with 1 or 2 rowdy kids, and the whole table will become one big rowdy mess. 100% of the time. Well, 99.9% of the time. I had this girl, completely serious, rarely laughed, always willing to help, and usually more mature than anyone else in her table or classroom. She was impervious to rowdy influences, to the point where I was actually concerned that there was something serious going on in the household. Had a general parent meeting with her parents, as I do with all the kids. I found out why. I have never dealt with more polite and solemn people in my whole life. I attempted 2 fail-safe jokes to warm up the mood and they failed so bad I had to pretend to write notes for almost a minute to regain my composure. Not rude or cold, just polite and solemn, is the only way to describe them, like they were at a funeral. ESL teacher here. You'd be surprised by how much the way you talk influence your kids. I haven't had any particular horror story, but I've had plenty of students that talked very slowly, or very loud, or very softly, or with arrogance, etc. Each and every time I've met their parents, I've noticed their voice is exactly the same. Worst part is a lot of them weren't aware of this and said their children had a problem with the way they talk and I should help them with that. Parenting life pro tip. Kids are like sponges. They absorb everything they see the older people around them do, especially their parents. Act like you want them to act. Literally just posted about this, but I work at an after-school program and we have all K5 kids. There is a 4th grader who has to be the center of attention. He has to win every game. He will fake an injury to avoid losing being it. He says and does pretty nasty things to kids he sees as less than him. He's a bigger kid so he easily overpowers a lot of kids his age. And when we would go to his mother about his actions she would say that we lied and he would never do whatever he did. It didn't matter how many adults and students saw him do it, she denied and would then get upset with us. She'd say we're picking on him because he stands out. He echoes these words whenever he's in trouble, and it's a never-ending cycle that we can really do nothing about because there's nothing being done at home. Sorry we hold your child to a high standard. Sorry we expect your child to follow the rules. Sorry your child cannot do what is asked and is picked on. For real, this drives me nuts. I worked as a teaching assistant at a school last year. One 8-year-old kid was incredibly competitive and would threaten other students who were in 2nd or 3rd place in competitions to stay in their place so that he could win something, and he would become incredibly red-faced and stressed. He would literally threaten his peers. He even threatened to kill other students over a competition of who could make this little robot move within tape lines on the floor. He would become completely irrational during competitions, it was crazy. Then his parents came in for school sports day and had a full meltdown when they didn't win the jockey parent race we do at the end of the day. They accused other parents of cheating because they had sports shoes on whereas other parents had just come from work. So they just did the race barefoot. The dad went as far as demanding a rematch on a more level surface. Other parents just did a funny pose at the start line to make the kids laugh, ran the race and freaking went home. This is not as sad and horrible as the others, but crap, I can't imagine the very high levels of stress that kid is gonna go through for the rest of his life. Had a kid who would struggle to listen to anything or follow directions. When told what to do he would break down. Eventually got him to start listening a little bit. Met his mom. She lets him do whatever he wants, even write on the walls in their house. She's too scared to tell her own child no. Small kid in grade 4, 9 years old, threatened another kid on the playground with a jackknife and said, "I am gonna kill you." Called in his mother who was quite appalled and then warned us about his father. Exactly as she said. The man was unhinged. Within a few minutes he was raging angry and threatening the administrators. He was escorted off campus. Later he threatened to come back and the campus was locked down for the only time I remember in its history and police were alerted. That poor kid has no chance of growing up normal. His dad is a bomb with an extremely short fuse. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree is so very true. There's a boy in my class who hits children and laughs about it, most often with small disturbing smile as the other kid freaks out. We've told his parent repeatedly, and she stands there with her arms crossed looking at us like we should go die. Then she smiles at her son and asks in an overly cheerful voice if he wants to get ice cream, go to the movies, play mini golf, essentially rewarding him for this behavior. It's so freaking infuriating, but it makes sense, because it's right there. I've met a lot of parents of great kids and it totally makes sense that their kid is great because they're super nice and polite and normal. But I know people are here for the horror stories. I taught kindergarten for the first part of my career. My last year in K I had a girl who was possibly the brattiest child I ever met. She had no qualms telling me no when I'd ask her to do something totally reasonable, was mean and nasty to the other kids. Just a total nightmare. At Meet the Teacher night, she came with her mom. Despite me asking parents to leave their children at home unless absolutely necessary, and was totally disruptive and noisy, and mom said nothing. Mom stuck around to ask me a question at the end and her daughter was covering her mouth as she was trying to speak. The mother just eventually gave up trying to ask me anything. I was so shocked I didn't even know what to do. A kid I had the year before was another hot mess. I had a really small class that year, which never happens in an urban public school, and it was so great for their social development. Except this kid. He didn't want to learn his classmates' names and didn't want to play with them. Fair enough. But he would also interrupt them when it was their turn to talk because he wanted it to be his turn. Everything had to be about him or he'd throw a fit. He did no work and was well behind all of the other kids. I met with the parents about his progress and they just laughed and shrugged. That's just his personality, he's the star. They also didn't make him do any of the extra work I sent him to help him catch up because he didn't feel like it. I was so happy to watch him walk out of my door on the last day of school. I had this student who was so down on himself. His intuition for math was great and he would understand everything in class, but then there was no follow through, no effort on homework or anything. At parent-teacher conferences he had almost failed my class, but I'll let him do makeup work and he just barely made it. I spoke to him in front of his father and I said, I think he can do better than this. The father looked at him and said, I don't think he can. I think this is your best. I'm not supposed to contradict parents, but I said, I think he will prove you wrong. I realized his father constantly shoots on him, so he has no motivation. The kid ended up getting expelled shortly after for something unrelated. Some parents live in fear that their kids will do better in life than they did, and will get stuck up. I had an extremely self-absorbed and arrogant student. The only person in real life I've ever heard use the phrase "do you know who I am?" Apparently he had won some local sports contest and he really wanted to impress this younger student. He harassed every girl in the school. The first conversation I had with his mother, she sniveled. You do know this is a sports school, right? Not an academic school. Click. I am at education program II, a low-paying education job. There was this girl, let's call her Tamara, a junior. She was an overall decent kid that has some issues with attendance. She's been known to skip classes, and occasionally has a bit of a temper with some of her teachers. But I knew how to defuse her and get her back focused on the task at hand. She responded well to me, but when she is here she likes staying after as long as possible, and has fallen asleep in my room waiting for a ride. After a string of absences, her mother called us in for a parent-teacher conference. Now we do this as a group of her teachers and administration instead of singling it down to just one-on-one. We get in there with Tamara, make some small talk as we get our grade books ready to discuss her work. Enter Tamara's mother. She immediately starts yelling at the poor girl and laying into her about how much of a W she is and how she's been sneaking off campus to get into trap houses, drug houses, in the area. She goes on to explain that she's not actually Tamara's mom, but a friend of her original parents who died about 2 years ago. Since then she graciously took in the girl and her 3 siblings into her home. She also goes on to explain how one of the older boys had physically abused Tamara's younger sister and was in jail for it. I was disturbed at the level of emotional abuse, and how she wanted us to rally with her against her daughter. How shaming her would fix the situation in any way. Tamara shrunk down. Her fire was all gone. Her anger diminished. She clearly wanted nothing more than to be free of this woman. Her behavior of skipping, trying to get high, spending as much time as possible away from home all made sense. It also explains why she had a much better affiliations with male teacher as opposed to female teachers, because female authority figures have all but been destroyed in her eyes. She was much more retreated after that, and clearly had been taking more abuse. We contacted DFACS after that meeting, and that horrible encounter. We worried for her safety, and those of her siblings. I know they followed up, but I never found out the full details because it was dealt with by our social worker. Tamara said that her mother calmed down a lot and eased off her and her siblings, but I could still see the lingering fear in her eyes. The damage was done. 2 years later I was happy to see her graduate. I actually saw her a few weeks ago at Chipotle. She was on a short leave from the army and was taking her girlfriend out for a quick bite to eat. I realized then she was also undergoing pressure for her guardian shaming her for being gay. I was so happy to see her smile. A real smile. A couple years ago when I taught 8th grade social studies, this one female student, a real nice girl and somewhat quiet and reserved, but she had a huge attendance problem. A good week would be her showing up twice. To her credit, when she came back she would at least make an attempt to make up the work, but when you miss 3-4 days a week it's a crap ton of work to make up. She had already failed the 8th grade once, and apparently 6th grade too, and the school actually wasn't afraid to hold her back again. So during May, with about 1 month left, we started having parent conferences for those who have students in danger of not moving to 9th grade. Mum comes in wearing pajamas, her gut sticking out of her shirt, carrying nothing but her phone and her Newport cigs. We start explaining the situation to Mom and she couldn't care less. She told us she's probably off with her boyfriend, a 21-year-old, actually a former student of mine as well. Mum kept paying her cell phone bill, let the 21-year-old boyfriend crash their house occasionally, etc. I'd show Mom examples of the work her daughter was capable of and was completely indifferent to it. Everything clicked to me upon meeting Mom. She was essentially encouraging her daughter not to care about school. It's a shame because the student was really bright and a sweet kid, and had so much potential with even mediocre support at home. Mum was probably raised the same way, and just everything made sense to me. I had a student who was a low-level rebel. I taught an elective, but I'm sure he was put in my class because it seemed low effort at the time. He was sulky, had issues with authority, didn't turn in his homework, etc. I dealt with him the same way that I deal with all my kids, and we slowly started to develop some fragile rapport. At parent-teacher conferences, his mom brought him along. He looked trapped and defensive, and she looked irritated. By that point in the year, he was passing my class, so I started off by reviewing his grades and the events that were coming up in my class. She interrupted me near the end to say yeah, but what is his behavior in class like? How badly is he behaving? Few poor kid slides lower in his chair, and I can tell that his mom brought him along as an exercise in shaming her kid. I didn't feel like playing that game, so I brightly laid out every possible positive interaction I had with him during the year, the conversations he had with me about career aspirations, the times he showed up on time to class, whatever I could throw at her. She left still looking irritated, but her kid left looking a little better. Sure, there were things I wished he would improve on, but that's a conversation for me and him to work out, not something to pile on in an evening of lectures from other teachers. Pretty much every time there's a parent-teacher conference, the kid who doesn't do his or her work, there's a good chance that the parent's too busy on their phone to actually pay attention to what's going on. The kid who acts out in class, parents either spend the whole meeting screaming at the kid or they spend it screaming at the teacher. I do remember one specific conference when I was a student teacher, though. A kid had been having trouble with another student and had been escalating things pretty aggressively. When we talked to Mom about it, Mom responded with something very close to, well, I told her that she ought to slap that little bee in the mouth. Gee, I wonder where the kid got it from. I was tutoring 3 kids in the same family. All of them were way behind from where they should be in school, barely reading, terrible at math, etc. I would work with them in their living room when Grandpa walks by and says, I don't know why you bother with that crap. I never learned to read and it never slowed me down. I quit shortly after that. That's so sad. I'll never understand people who have that kind of a disconnect of like, but my experience is fine so it must be that way, everyone! 1 inches. Hopefully those kids got the help they needed. 1. Had one kid. 7th grader, selling and smoking pot on campus. This is before it was legal, even now you still can't have it on campus. Told the mom the kid had pot and she said I know, I gave them to him. It's his medicine. 2. Had another kid who would freak out whenever asked to do something he didn't want to. He'd scream, throw things, cry, and he's in 10th grade. Once he punched through a glass trophy case. Met the mom and explained that her son seriously needed an environment with more one-on-one support. She said he was just dehydrated and we shouldn't be so hard on him. 3. Final one is more sad. Had a kid that was constantly getting into fights for no apparent reason. Would inappropriately touch girls then vehemently deny it because he's not a monster. Found out from his mom that his dad was shot on his front lawn when he was 6. He was bullied ruthlessly since 3rd grade. Now he's in high school. At 14 he's the oldest of 4 and expected to be the man of the house. His family had recently been evicted. When his mom was in jail he saw his mom's then boyfriend inappropriately touch his little sister. And once getting out of jail his mom was diagnosed with diabetes. If that was my life I'd probably want to take it out on everyone else too. Had one kid, 7th grader, selling and smoking pot on campus. This is before it was legal, even now you still can't have it on campus. Legalization doesn't extend to 7th graders. This one is more about privilege than behavior. I'm a college professor and I had a student who put in minimal effort into everything he did, just barely enough to pass his classes. Over the course of 4 years, I get to know many of my students fairly well and I'm obviously very interested in their careers and immediate work plans after graduation. This particular student always humble bragged about how he'd get a great job and, amazingly, a few months before graduation, he informed everyone that he already had a fantastic job lined up in a major metro area a couple states away. I found this astounding, because not only was the job in our field, which was surprising enough, it was with a good size company I'd actually heard of. The student acted like he got the job due purely to his skills and efforts throughout college, and since I knew neither of those was true, I had huge doubts he even had the job at all. A week or 2 before graduation we have a showcase where students show off their work, and parents and others are invited. At this showcase, this student's parents came to see his work and I found out that both of them worked high up, one as an attorney, the other in management, in a different large company located within blocks of the place where the student got his job. I heard them mentioning to their son, in an offhanded way as if this were totally normal, that they had spoken again with their friend at the other company, and everything was good to go for him to start after graduation. His real struggle will be keeping the job, since he was never interested in any of the classes or anything in college. Maybe his parents have enough connections to keep him there for a while, but in the long term it might not work. I was a tutor working for a charity who helped children who were not doing well in school. We helped with their numeracy, literacy, and social skills as an after-school program. We had a child there who treated it like a joke, always saying that reading and maths were not worth it in the long run. The mother would always arrive after we had finished with the children and whisk them away without talking to anyone. It took us all a long time to get the child warmed up to the idea that reading could be fun. One day his parents arrived and it all made sense. To put it nicely, they were dumber than a box of rocks. Poor grasp of English in general, no interest in their child's progress, and maintained that their child only needed basic levels of literacy and numeracy. It was incredibly sad to witness, especially since their child quickly developed a voracious love of reading. He very rapidly gained a reading level several years above the one he was in, 2nd grade. Watching him progress so rapidly warmed me, but it also makes me sad that he is not getting the academic support he needs from his parents. When I left the charity a couple of years after first meeting the parents, he had just started reading adult novels and was surprising me with his insight on relatively complex topics. He was a particularly smart kid and I truly wish him the best in life. That's a bit like a real life Matilda. I hope he got enough support from the outside. As a high school senior, I was a TAFE for a 5th period 8th grade English class for kids who weren't special education, but were troubled and did not want to learn. Kids who would yell frick you when the teacher would have a pop quiz and then turn in an empty page. There was one kid who was incredibly hard to deal with. He would get in daily shouting matches with the teacher. He would run out the door when her back was turned and try to scale the fence. Things like that. One day, after the class had had a particularly good week, the teacher rewarded them by checking out Princess Mononoke from the library. I'd never seen the kid so quiet. He was absolutely entranced. And then a character said dang or bled and the teacher freaked out and turned it off. The kid responded by throwing his chair at the whiteboard. He was suspended for a week and his parents were called to pick him up. They answered their house phone, acknowledged that they understood the situation, said they were on their way, but they never came to pick him up. I ended up driving the kid home and he told me that both of the cars in his driveway were his parents' cars. They just didn't bother. The next day, his parents dropped him off at school again. Despite the suspension, he sat in the office all day, his parents not responding to calls to pick him up. A parent-teacher meeting was scheduled with the parents, but they didn't show. This happened about 3 times before the teacher gave up on having one. We never actually met the parents face to face, but at that point both the teacher and I understood exactly what kind of parents they were and why the kid was the way he was. Dang, that's heartbreaking. You have been visited by the romantic doggo. Comment love is magic so you never fall in the friend zone. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.